Hello and welcome back to the building of, or the refurbishment of, this Fokker DR1. In the last video I pressed on and built the bulk of the main structure of the upper wing, which was totally destroyed and needed replacing. And in the absence of a plan, what I did was I got onto AutoZone, found a 1/4 scale drawing for a DR1, and using that and what I could see from the middle and the lower wing, I was able to come up with this. The real departure from the Fokker flare version is this central beam spar, which I think is a really strong structure and much stronger than having two separate spars with webbing in between, simply because I think there's some difficulty in getting the webbing to be effective. This is far stronger approach. Anyway, it's done. However, as you can see, it's still lacking the ailerons, it's still lacking the riblets, and it needs some wood work along the edge of the tips. The first thing I need to do here is, using the plan that I drew up, is to line up the spars with the spars on the aileron. And if you've looked at the previous video, you'll know that I had to slightly adjust the positioning of the ribs that I'd measured out to match the middle wing. I don't know why that was. I think there's just some indiscrepancies in the way the middle wing had been built, which I hadn't done, and it would look silly if these were different to the middle one. So I'll rub out the positions for the mini spars on the aileron, just so that there's no confusion. And I'm going to mark on where they should go, and then we can press on and start making this little addition. Adds quite dramatically to the appearance of the upper wing, the ailerons, because they protrude further back than the chord, I think that's the correct term, of the wing. So they're quite prominent. There you go, happy with them. Double check. So that's the position of them. I'll draw them on and let's start building this. Let's start making the ailerons now. I've marked on the position of the ribs. I hope that's clear. And I've got some nice timber here. It's lightweight, but it's quite rigid. It's the material that would be ideal, for example, for making ribs. Quarter grain, I believe, is the term used to describe it. You can tell by that flecked pattern. So that's the width of the ailerons. That's not allowing for a cutaway to allow them to move, but I can change that later on. It's 2.5 inches, so I'll mark 2.5 inches all the way down, and I'll get this cut out. I'm going to change the direction of the grain on the end tip, which I think will add to the strength, and also make it less likely to twist and warp. So this point here is going to be the break off point for the end tip, and that very nicely is the length. So mark that off. Let's get this marked, and then off camera I'll cut it out because I've got a nice flat work surface that I can use. I'm trying not to hack this work pinning board to pieces, which I have done in the past. Anybody watching the videos will recognise I'm a very messy worker. It's just the way I am, that's not going to change. So cut that out and we'll mark the end bit, and then we'll get it glued together. To mark out this end tip, what I'm going to do is slide it underneath, and I'll use a pin. Actually, I'll use a pin first of all to push it up to the right position. So I can feel where this is. There we go, that's the end on. The corner's way out of line. Making this far more difficult than it needs to be really, but never mind. That's close enough, just so I don't waste material. And I'm just going to pin through the shape that I'm after. And then I can mark that on, draw it out on the wood. There we go. Now that's not all together visible. I'll get a pen, mark it out so you can see it, just in case you can't see the pinholes. This one's slightly curved actually. And there we have the shape that I'm looking for the end piece. There you go. Let's cut this out. You notice how good I'm being actually cutting out on a cutting board. Cliff Harvey, in his recent glider build, he'd been warned about the state of his workbench because it could damage the model that you were working on. Goodness knows how some of my models ever get finished considering the way I work. I've long gave up trying to change my habits because it's just part of who I am, I think. And I think it would probably make us thoroughly miserable if I was spending all my time tidying the workbench up instead of pressing on and getting a project moving. Now I'm going to pin this to the board and I'm going to glue it with white glue rather than CA because ultimately I think that's a stronger bond. The CA can be brittle, I know it can be brittle, but here we go. That's the shape we're looking for, really nice. I'll get some clear wrap down on the board and we'll start building up this aileron. Looking good. As you can see here now, I've pinned down the ailerons and I've also placed the wing in position, and the reason for this is if I take the leading edge of the aileron to here, then I'm not giving any support to this end piece. An instinct tells me that there should be support across here. To do that, this leading edge at least will need to be built up a little bit higher so that I can actually put some support in here. So what I think I'm going to do is I'm going to take the spar right the way across, and then that would taper down. and then I can actually build up some supports, a diagonal support here and a little bit of an edge on this part here, to impart a little bit of strength on the actual aileron itself. I think that's what I'm going to go with. So let's get this cut to length. I'm not bother tapering the end off yet. Simply mark off the length required. Just cut that off camera, bear with me. We'll glue this on and take it all the way over the end, and that's going to impart a lot more strength onto this part. We'll need a little bit of redesign in this rear part of the tip, but I think it's worth doing. Let's get some glue along here. And this in itself will need to be tapered away to allow the aileron to flex and bend. There's plenty of material on there to remove some. I'm happier with that idea now, though it will need a lot of tapering down. Let's get that pinned in place. Now when it comes to the ribs, they've come out here. I'm not going to cut them as ribs actually, I'm just going to cut them out as rectangular pieces. And they can be glued in. And then the whole thing will be tapered down once it's completed. Right, let's get some of those cut and we'll get them glued in. You might notice that there's that I've unpinned the ailerons, and that's because when I was looking at it, I realised that it wasn't going to work with the end tip. In fact, the drawings that I had weren't very helpful at all. So what I've actually come up with is this. Starting from the wingtip, you can see that I've added some balsa here, balsa for the front, just for resilience really. But this will allow the aileron to be blended in nice and neatly, and you can see, I hope, the amount of wood that I need to take off. All this is scrap, and this corner scrap, and this will blend away before I actually start putting the ribs on. I'm sure that that's going to work. So I've roughly blended this. It also involved cutting this tip off again and blending and taking the back down to the bottom of the base of the ribs, and that gives a nice curve, and it seemed to fare in much more neatly with the aileron. So once this is trimmed off, I think it'll aerodynamically look right. I'll hold it like that, aerodynamically look right, and won't jut below the surface and won't look out of place. So let's take that off here, and one of the quickest ways of doing that, of course, is by using the David plane. Makes loads of shavings. They get all over the house, get stuck to your slippers. Great after the wife's just gone round the house and cleaned it properly. It's coming off nicely there. I haven't got too big a cut on this, because if you do, you can sort of tear into the wood. Sort of getting there, isn't it? Now I've got to take this off. Same procedure. Not all the way down, just to the mark. Now, it's a sanding block away from being done, that. Let's get rid of all the shavings. Now if we look at it, you can see that fares in much better. Obviously it needs sanding down. And it looks, to me that looks right now. So I'll clean up all this mess, I'll get the ribs put on, and then that'll be this aileron done. And I think what I'll do is I'll complete one wing totally, and that whole process, and then obviously the repeating of it, you don't need to watch that. Aileron completed. It just needs to be tapered down. This end tip, which can be a vulnerable part, is now solid, just needs all sanding and smoothing out. And I'm going to use the plane to just take these off down to make the ribs. I could have cut them out in advance, but this is just as easy, and it's twice as much fun making a mess, isn't it? So I'll take all of those down, and that's the aileron completed. The next task, capping strips, top and bottom of the ribs, and after I've actually put the riblets in, and I have, I've made a mock-up after a bit of trial and error. This is basically what it'll look like, each one. So I need to make a set of them, and I think I'll cut a plywood template out to make sure that they're accurate, and do exactly the same procedure as I've done with the ribs, and then they can all be laid in. Next little task, riblets. There's the aileron riblets produced. I must admit I chickened out and I cut them out with a knife. So I didn't end up with a house full of shavings. There you go, ready to start the capping next. I hope you can see here, there are a couple of plywood templates that have been made for the riblets, and as before, place them onto the balsa, mark the centres through, roughly cut them out, and then do them in blocks. I think I need 18 in total. Get those done and we can start gluing those in. Riblets cut, time to start sticking them in. See here to do this, because I don't want them moving around once I've decided that they're right. Like that, for example. Happy that they're square. See you applied. Let's do the rest. Well, that's half of the capping strips now added. Sorry, riblets, I'm thinking ahead of myself. The next job is to put the capping strips on. So I'll get them cut and I'll add them to the upper layer. I've cut one length for the capping strip. The only thing you need to consider when you're doing this, if you're doing this, is that because the grain is running lengthways, it can be a little bit reluctant to conform to the shape that you want. So to help that out, it's worthwhile soaking the wood a little, or even adding a little bit of steam, which is something I've just done. I'm pinning this down because the capping strips actually add strength to the shape and rigidity. So pinning it down, keeping it square to begin with, is a good idea. Just trim a little bit off. Happy with that? Think so. This is where really C8 comes into its own. Because if you were using white glue to do this, you would have multiple pins in it and you'd be struggling to keep it flat, and it would be a nightmare, in my view. It may be worthwhile me diving into the workshop and getting some activator actually, because sometimes these capping strips can be a little bit reluctant, and a little bit of zap or activator helps. That's one done. I'll do one more full one, and then we'll do the rest off camera and I'll show you it when it's been completed. That's looking good. And all the measurements and the offsets seem to be working, because these capping strips are now coming out flush with the leading edge and the trailing edge, so I've done something right. Wonders never cease. Sometimes things go well and sometimes they don't, and you've just got to accept that and work around the issues. So there's the two long ones. I'll add, excuse me, I'll add one more here onto this, and then I'll crack on and do the rest, and you can come back when it's all done. Well, the top strips are done. There's also the bottom to do, and there's lots of work still to go into these wings, so still lots of fun to be had. I'm already getting twitchy about the next project, and I'm not even halfway through this one. But that's just the way I am. There you go. Looking good, if I say so myself. Well, I'm going to call this part of the build of the wing done. I'm really pleased that I've solved a couple of issues, particularly around this area of the wing. It seems to make sense to me the way I've gone about it. Capping strips on the upper part of the wing, at least half of the wing. I'll finish the other side doing all the things I've done today, and then it'll be flipped over and the capping strips on the bottom will be added. These haven't been added yet because these are the two ribs that sandwich the inter-wing struts. And of course I have still loads to do. I need to resolve the cabin area and put in a box for a servo to activate the ailerons. But overall I'm really happy with that. I'm knee deep in balsa dust and shavings, so it's time to tidy some of the mess up at least. I'm glad that I've got this far. I hope you've enjoyed the journey so far too. If you have, please give it a thumbs up. And if you haven't already done so, why not subscribe? And then you can follow the rest of the build and other modelling adventures. Bye for now.